Thanks, Matt.
Let's move all this stuff out of there. And
Have a good time. Thank you for leading us, Mr. Former President. Hi, guys. Tonight we are going over some more of our semester theme. So 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk on tactics, and I talked about the first part of the book. Today we're going to talk more about the second half of the book, part 2, finding the flaws, and this is a review of last week. This is our content that we went over. We talked about the Columbo questions and why it's important to ask questions and why asking questions is very beneficial to keep you in the driver's seat. We asked, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And have you ever considered? Those were the highlights if you didn't see it. This was the main takeaway of last time, and the goals have not changed. Okay, these are still your goals in any given conversation, okay? So, it's the same thing. So I've titled this, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to do our little tagline of our semester, which is, pursue truth, share the gospel, and love others. And that's what we're always trying to do as ambassadors of Christ. So, I gave you kind of an outline of how to have a good conversation. This time is going to be a bit more focused on what happens when. So like when you encounter this type of reasoning, or when you encounter this type of person, or when you encounter this type of statement, how to be on the look for it and how to navigate around in it. Okay, I've titled this talk Common Conversation Pickles. I thought it was funny because different types of conversations, but sometimes it's more a line of reasoning that we're talking about, not necessarily the type of person. So this is our outline. This is what we're going to be going over in this talk tonight. So we're going to go through each one of these and figure out what Greg Koukl is talking about, and I'll be quoting his book quite often because this is a talk on the second half of his book. So, but we will always be referencing the first 3 questions the 3 questions that Greg Koukl talks about, which is, have you ever considered, or what do you mean by that? Have you ever, how did you come to that conclusion, and have you ever considered? So, the first one is suicide. We're talking about views that self-destruct. And you'll notice Greg uses these very polarizing words, these types of words, to kind of give you a vivid image of what's going on. So it may seem insensitive, but what it is it's talking about the type of conversation that you're having, or the type of conversation, the type of statement that's being made, okay? So if there's a statement in this section, we're going to talk about a statement that defeats itself, like it's dead on arrival. There's no reviving that statement. There's no way to hold that statement consistently or even practically. So some ideas are self-destruct on their own. These statements fail to meet their own standard of truthness or truthfulness or validity. In the book, it talks about if you give a man enough rope, he'll hang himself. Like, keep letting them talk, and if they talk, they'll talk themselves in a circle. So these views have within themselves seeds of their own destruction because they express contradictory concepts. Okay, so examples of this is the statement, "There is no absolute truth." So what I want to teach you with this tactic is to apply the claim to its own self, and this is something that needs to get like second nature to you. Okay, so there is no absolute truth. So the question would be, is that absolutely true? Because you're making a statement about truth. Does it include itself? So yes, so it's believed to be true. Talking about God is meaningless. So what are we teaching you? Apply the claim to itself, right? So is that talk meaningless? Is that statement a meaningless statement? So when you bring this up, the person who's making the statement needs to do some reflecting. So you'll see them back off a second and actually apply the claim to itself, because that's what you're asking them to do. You're asking them to think critically, right? You can know truth only through experience. Now, is that truth arrived at through experience? Or is it just a philosophical claim that's laid out there? So that's not a truth that's known by experience, right? It fails its own test, okay? Never take anyone's advice on that issue. What about that advice? Should I not take that advice, right? You see the theme that we're doing here, right? Can God make a rock so big he can't lift it? This type of question. It's basically asking, can God win an arm wrestling match with himself? Like, well, that doesn't make sense. Can God's power defeat his own power? This is an incoherent statement. So it's self-referentially not the case. So we're applying the claim to itself. I have a buddy, and I love him so much. He's a buddy of mine, and he sat in my living room and said directly to my face, if there's one thing, I might have told this before, if there's one thing I know for certain, it's that everything is theory. And I had to whisper, I was like, is that a theory? And so he didn't know what to do. He had never been challenged on it before. He thought it sounded nice, and so he had said it to people before, and people were like, yeah, for sure. Everything's theory, for sure. What about that? Is that a theory? You know that. You said, if there's one thing I know for certain, you hyped it up a whole lot. Anyway, so that's the type of thing that we're talking about here. Here's a joke from a show. No one in New York drives, there's too much traffic. Well, it's inside itself, if no one drives, then there's no traffic. But if there's too much traffic, then people are driving. My parents had no children that lived. You're like, oh, okay, wait, your parents? The ones that you had? You have? So, and these things are self-destructing statements. I can't speak a word in English, said out loud. They express contradictions. They make two different claims that are at odds with each other. A is the case and A is not the case. This one that you have in your textbooks. This page is left intentionally blank. Well, that page is not blank at all. There are all kinds of stuff on that. At least that sentence. So, this page has this sentence on it. I mean, that would be more consistent, right? So these are ones so this is the second one. This is practical suicide. So these statements aren't inherently self-destructing, but it's the same style of deal. It can't be practiced without it imploding. Okay? So you shouldn't judge other people, says the person who's judging someone, right? So they can hold it, and that'd be fine, but as soon as they try to practice it, they're entailing the judgment. And same thing with these other examples, right? And a statement I heard a couple years ago here at Ratio Christi, I think, it was, you cannot deny absolute truth without affirming it. And I thought that was awesome, because it took me a while to figure out. I'll say it again. You cannot deny absolute truth without affirming it. If you deny it absolutely, you're denying that it's the case absolutely, true for all people in all places and all times. But that would be an absolute truth. And that same guy that I talked about earlier, my buddy, I put that up as my Facebook status, and he commented, he's like, well, technically you're right, and he tried to argue, and it was awesome. I had a blast. So that's the type of thing we're talking about. So a review of that, pay attention to the basic premise, apply the claim to itself, see if it meets its own standard, and that absolute truth is the right type of truth. So tips on this one, be on the lookout for polarized words. Those should be red flags in your everyday life. So when someone says all, or everybody, or never, or no one, these like blanket statements that cover a bunch of ground, look out for what's coming around and see if it actually is true. Because oftentimes there's there's an exception, and you're like, okay, that's an overstatement, or you're being hyperbolous on purpose. So that was the first two, suicide, views of self-destruct, and practical suicide. Next, we have sibling rivalry and infanticide. Once again, very strong words, but showing a relationship between two claims. Sibling rivalry would be two different claims that are, this is similar to the last section in here in that they defeat themselves. But what we're trying to do is get you to think about the two claims and see if they apply to each other. And don't let people off the hook on this one, okay? Infanticide would be, so sibling rivalry would be two different statements that kind of just can exist by themselves, and infanticide would be a parent statement and the child statement, and then the parent statement kills the child statement. So this one can be held, but not this one if this one's held. So that's what's going on here. And a note about this one is it does not remove. So I'm going to tell you how to use what Greg talks about, but it does not remove the onus on you to answer the question. Because I was looking through this and preparing this talk, and I was like, he's like avoiding the question. And I don't like that. That's not cool. I just talked about burden of proof, and I am all about the burden of proof. And so in this one, he kind of switches what's going on, but he's trying to make a point to the challenger that is important. Okay, enough preface. Here is an example between a conversation between a Hindu and a Christian. Hindu asks if Gandhi is in heaven. He's like, oh, you must believe in heaven. Who goes there? Good people. Well, what makes somebody good? Well, so in the Hindu religion, good and bad are relative. And so he expresses that opinion. But he also wants Gandhi to be in heaven and was talking about how Gandhi is so good, he should be in heaven. And so he asks him, the Christian asks the Hindu to be consistent with his worldview, because he's holding two different opinions. Gandhi should be in heaven because he's good. Good and bad are both relative, and nobody really knows. So that's what's going on here. This is an example of sibling rivalry where somebody holds two different views. Now notice, the Christian didn't answer the Hindu's question. Is Gandhi in heaven? He didn't answer that. The Christian did a little judo flip, and that I was like, hey, rude. Answer his question, man. But this is something that you need to look for and be aware of. So you still have to answer the question, but helping someone think well is important. Infanticide. I lost my phone. Leave your number, and we'll call you when we find it. Hilarious, right? Because if they're going to call him, he would have to have his phone. This is this, like, I need this parent-child relationship talking. So, or I think it's wrong to say words out loud. You have to have those said out loud. Or no yelling. Or I'll text Ben. Ben's online. Hi, Ben. And I'll text him. I'll say, let me know if you don't get my text. That's the same thing. You have to actually have it before you know those things. Or a teacher who at the beginning of your class says, okay, if you're not here, raise your hand. I think that's hilarious because it makes you think about, well, if you're not here, that's the type of thing we're talking about. Pay attention to those things. See if they work out. This is what we're teaching you, right? Okay. C.S. Lewis had a talk, or said a famous line. I think this is my favorite C.S. Lewis quote. I can't remember. One of my favorites at the very least. That his argument against God was that the world was cruel and unjust. But he then thinks, how did I get that idea? I don't crawl a crooked line crooked unless I know what's straight. And so he noticed that he had two competing ideas in his head. This is an example of two competing ideas where they can't exist at the same time. So, another example. Why would God allow evil to occur in the world? And then also in the same person saying God is unjust for killing the Canaanites, saying, why would God allow evil? And then also, why would God punish evil? So what you have to do here is you have to write down the objections in clear, unambiguous terms, and then ask them if that's what they mean. So this is the type of thing that we're looking to address. Homosexuality is morally neutral because it's natural, and then that same person argues that same-sex couples should be allowed to adopt children. So this one takes a little bit more work because they're arguing for it to be, that it's morally neutral because it's natural, but in the same breath wanting same-sex couples to be allowed to adopt children. But if you take the first one and apply it consistently to the second one, if you intentionally choose a childless union, then it would be unnatural for that childless union to adopt a child, because then that would be an unnatural outcome, right? So you're arguing for natural. So we're just applying claims consistently here. Is what we're working on. Okay. So Koukl talks about he wants to show the person that there's a fatal inconsistency in her beliefs, a problem he thinks she would correct if she understood it, and that's where we're talking about that. This isn't. We're not avoiding answering the question. We're just showing that, hey, you hold two different viewpoints here. What about that? Kind of showing them in unambiguous ways. So this technique is not an end in itself, but it can be used as a bridge to further questions. Okay, so next one, probably my favorite one. Taking the roof off. This is, if you've heard of reductio ad absurdum, I mean reducing an argument to its absurd conclusions, absurd or interesting, counterintuitive results. He calls it taking the roof off. So it trades a little bit on that. Hey, if we take what you said and apply it consistently, this is an example of what that would look like. It basically it proves too much. We talked about that when we did logical fallacies. What you have said, if applied consistently, this would be the same outcome. Can you show me why that would be not correct? And usually the example we're showing is something pretty crazy, or wrong, or just something that people don't want to believe, right? So we're taking their philosophy for a test drive, is what he calls it. Reduce the person's point of view to its basic argument. Write it down if you have to, and then check to see with the person if you got it right. Let me see if I understand you correctly. Then ask yourself if I follow this principle consistently, what are the consequences? What are the implications for other issues? Does it lead somewhere counterintuitive, wrong, or absurd? And then, once you have that example, point it out. Bring it up to them and see if that is what they're saying. And often this can dispel that, or they can double down and say, yep, that is what I'm saying, and bite the bullet, basically. I've seen them do that as well. So here is a chance for you to talk with your neighbors. Here are some examples of some arguments. I know they are vague, but you can either infer or you can skip to the next one. But I want you to talk with your neighbors and take the roof off of these arguments, and I will explain them a little bit more detail afterwards. If you don't know what I'm talking about, or if you don't want to infer what people are talking about there, I'll give you the first one. Mother Teresa was trying to get a murderer acquitted from the death penalty, and her argument was Jesus would forgive, so the government should forgive as well. So take the roof off of that argument. Take the roof off of any of these other ones. We'll come back in 4 minutes, and we will talk through a little bit. Ready, go. All right. Come on back. 4 minutes is up. Thanks. Okay. All right, what happened? How'd you do? Which one did you tackle? Will?
We did all of them, but I started with the third one. And if you have that statement isolated by itself, you can apply that to any point in internal science, and that's all you're doing is making it what's the saying, before.
Yeah. Bingo. So Will talked about the third statement, abortion should be permissible in order to save them from future child abuse. And he said, apply that consistently. That could be applied to anybody at any time. It would be that what they're saying is it's better for someone to die than to undergo an evil. And in this instance, if Ben were here, I'd point at him, but I'll point at the computer. He would say use the trot out the toddler, because that would be the tactic of exactly what Will was talking about. Anybody else? How'd you take the roof off? Harrison.
The first one saying that Jesus would forgive,
Yeah.
basically giving the argument that we should try to, be exactly like Jesus in everything that he did.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about how he carried that all the way, and that would technically include with the tax collectors and the
Interesting. Yeah. So imitating Jesus in every way, it could include some things that Jesus did that we are not privy to.
And Will also pointed out that there are some things that Jesus did that we technically shouldn't do because we're not.
Yeah. Things that Jesus did that we shouldn't do. I like it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for going through that. I have one more of those, and then we'll keep going. But so taking the roof off is taking the claim and then applying it consistently to other areas of giving it a test drive is what Greg Koukl calls it. So Mother Teresa, I'll do this one. No, I'll do a few. Mother Teresa says, the claim is, if Jesus would forgive capital criminals, it's wrong to execute them. Jesus would forgive. But if you apply that consistently, that means that we should forgive, that all capital punishments, all government should forgive everyone always. And there's no basis for that. There's no basis to do that. You could just say Jesus forgave him, because it proves too much, right? So in a different way, I would say that, it would be too much it proves too much to say that Jesus would forgive, because you can use that for anything. And even though Jesus might forgive that murderer, it doesn't mean that it's wrong for capital punishment to take place, regardless of setting aside capital punishment arguments. But there's biblical merit for those things. But it would be an overreach to say forgive them, therefore don't punish anybody for any crime. Born that way could be I'm born this way, therefore it's okay, whatever behavior it is. So then apply it further on. Well, I'm born stomping on puppies. That's what I'm born to do. Therefore, it's okay, right? That would be applying the claim consistently. And that seems, people would kind of reel at that. Well, no, you shouldn't do that. Well, why not? I mean, I'm born that way. That is what I am born to do. And that would be the argument that you could make is, at least there seems to be some desires that we should not act upon, regardless of if they are innate in us or not. We talked about the abortion one. This one trades on a wrong view of faith, because then applied consistently, if faith is inversely proportional to knowledge, then the more knowledge we have, the less faith we have, and then the more evidence we would need if we wanted to be Christians. The more evidence against Christianity, the better, because then we have a whole lot of faith, right? That's what that would mean. But if this is your view of faith, if you think it's faith, if you think it's belief in spite of the evidence, or things we cannot know, then that'll get you kind of into a shallow belief system. Okay, so more of these. This person talked to me down at when I was tabling in the union, and he said, I'm personally against abortion, but I don't believe I have the right to tell a woman what she can or can't do with her body. And so what you need to do is you take it for a test drive. You first you examine the claim, and then explain it back to them in unambiguous terms, and say, okay, why are you personally against abortion? What do you mean? Why is that? What do you mean by that, basically? And then he said, I believe abortion kills a baby, but it's my personal view. And so you can say, okay, let me see if I understand you right, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. You believe that abortion kills an innocent child, yet you think the law should allow women to do that to their own babies. Did I get that right? And you're laying it out in a bit more unambiguous terms, and not this jargon that goes along with the pro-choice movement that says, I can and can't do with my body type stuff. You're saying, you're personally convicted that it's wrong and kills an innocent child, but it's okay, you want it to be okay for women to do that to their own children. And so then they have to wrestle with those two things. And sometimes they'll say, yep. And then you have to deal with that question and navigate that, which I can answer at the end if you'd like. So that's just your interpretation. If this is kind of thrown at you, ask them what they mean. Use what do you mean by that? If they mean that that's your interpretation among a bunch of other valid interpretations, then explain. Then take the roof off and go somewhere absurd with it, and say, I like to be really goofy with it, and say, well, I like that meatball recipe. I'll have to try it out sometime. And they look at you kind of confused. Or you can be a little more harsh with it and say, well, I respect your opinion on stomping puppies, but I would have to disagree that I think it's bad. I'm sorry that you think it's good. And they look confused at you. When you're like, well, that's my interpretation, right? That's how I interpreted what you said. Because what you're saying is that's your interpretation, downplaying what my interpretation of the thing was. So the point is, some interpretations are better than others, right? So you ask them what they mean, but then you take the roof off and take it to somewhere ridiculous. And whatever they say, you can interpret however you want, and if it's just as valid as everybody else's, then that would be a valid interpretation of what they said, even if it's ridiculous. That's what that does, is it takes the roof off and goes to somewhere absurd. Okay? I didn't want to lose you. Felt like I lost some of you. Okay, so this is more of a retort to be like to try to dismiss what your statement was, rather than actually engaging with it. So, reductio ad absurdum. Reduce it to its absurd conclusion. Take it for a test drive. Reduce it to basics. Figure out what it is. Write it down. Say it to them. Mentally give it a test drive to see where it goes. And then if you find a problem, invite them to consider the implications, if applied consistently. Right? But a tip here, you can't go too fast, just like what I did. I was like, I started talking about these other things, and you're like, where did you get that? Like, well, it's their philosophy applied in a ridiculous place. So you have to kind of go slower and lead them along to see, like, okay, if I take what you've said, that's just your interpretation, and all others' interpretations are good and valid, then this is where it would lead. And kind of lead them on the journey and try to, because you're trying to educate them, and help them to think well, right? That's what we're trying to do here. Okay, so we've talked through about 1 through 4, and now we're on to steamroller. And this one is a good one. This one's a tight spot with a hostile individual. Okay? Steamroller. I thought that was very clever. Okay, good. Moving on. Some people, so despite this hilarious joke, a steamroller is somebody who is a bit more resistant to gospel conversations. There's a number of reasons for this. We talked about this last time I was up. Just for your information, logical arguments don't always work with people. We wish they did, but people are not calculators. People are people. People have emotions. People have things that are tied to their opinions, And so when you give them a logical argument, sometimes it doesn't work like we want it to. It's not magic, okay? They have emotional resistance, or they may be prejudiced. Some people are stubborn or prone to arguing. We know somebody who's just, this is what they're here to do. They're here to argue, and you're not, it's going to be kind of wasting time talking to them. But this is the type of thing that happens. So whatever the reason, be prepared to deal with the steamroller in your conversation. Greg says that steamrollers overpower you with a strong personality and interrupt constantly. Here is what it looks like. You try to say something and they constantly interrupt, piling on objections and challenges. If you try to chase down one of those rabbit trails, they interrupt again and get more challenges in there. Never really listening to anything you say. It can get you off balance and be on the defensive. I had one of these conversations with a buddy of mine, a coworker of mine, a couple years ago. Awesome time, but I got flustered. Because he was saying stuff, and I was like, oh, I know an answer to that. Oh, I know that one. And I just got excited about those things, and he's throwing all these things at me, all in a row, all really quickly, all really loud. He's really tall. And it was just very intimidating. And so I didn't know what to do. And he had won the day, and I was like, oh, all right, we got to go take the kids to their next class now. And it was very frustrating. Some steamrollers are not in it to be frustrating, though. Some of them are more distracted. Maybe they're just overly excitable, but not really hostile. Most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, they're insincere with their questions. They're not really interested in answers. They're interested in winning through intimidation, right? It's like, oh, this picture up here. This is buckshot. You know, buckshot shoots a bunch of tiny little things and just all splatters at you once. That's what a steamroller does, is they kind of just dominate the conversation that way. Small groups again, for 3 minutes. For you to wrestle through, how would you, before I give you the answer, how would you deal with someone who exhibits these characteristics? 3 minutes, go. All right, come on back. That was fun, guys, thanks. Okay, so hopefully some of you got the right answer. I'm sure some of you failed at my test of how would you deal with steamroller. Thanks for working through it, guys. It's really cool because I want you to wrestle through it. I want you to think about it to see how you would handle it, and then rather than just me saying, "Here is all the things," I need you to think through it. So, how would you handle a steamroller? Because steamrollers are so aggressive, we are going to talk about how you need to handle them aggressively, not rudely, but aggressively. Here's how. So William Dembski talks about he's had many hostile encounters with opponents of his, and he says once your opponent has intimidated you and knows it, you've lost. So he wants to get you off balance. That's sort of his goal. So the first thing you have to do is stop him. Okay, stop the interruption by putting the discussion on pause. Okay. You're just asking for courtesy, basically, is all you're doing. Briefly stop, request permission to continue your point without being interrupted. I would raise my hand and actually stop him. Just be like, hey, just hold on a second, because you're being interrupted. You're being interrupted a lot. Or if they come to a pause in the conversation, then you can be like, can we hold on a second? And then after you've stopped him, you ask for more time. You say, sorry, I'm not quite finished yet. You just interrupt them if you've been in the middle of a talk and they've been doing this a lot. Or let me respond first to the first challenge, and then when I'm done, you can jump in again with another. Is that okay? Or that's a good question and it deserves a good answer, but it might take me a few minutes. Is that all right? Notice you're asking them for permission. You're stopping them and then asking them for permission. You're just negotiating for a good conversation. Don't let annoyance come in your voice here, because that'll not be good for the conversation. And especially with hostile steamrollers, it's really important to get their consent. So will that work, or is that all right? They have to. It's really important if they say yeah, that's okay, because then you can kind of call them on that later on if you need to. Don't let them get under your skin. This can be really frustrating. Be calm and confident and just kind of focus on the issue. Just be calm, be in a position of we're having a good conversation and you're a little hostile, but I'm here to do this. So you did a lot of work to buy this time. Don't waste it when you get it. Okay, or don't waste it and don't take unfair advantage of it. So if you've bought the time and they said yes, make sure you adequately answer their question, and then make your point and ask them, does that make sense? To stay on topic, right? Okay. So first step is stop him. If the steamroller breaks your trust or breaks your agreement, or if you couldn't even get to that point, move to step 2. Step 2 is shame him. Okay, this is a little more aggressive, and it takes more courage because you're actually going to address impolite behavior in the conversation. You're going to call it out, and it's going to be out there, and it's going to be a little uncomfortable if that's what's going on. He has a tip in here that says, use the person's name. People like hearing their name. So if you can use it in a friendly way, that's important. Be like, hey, and then use their name. So first, ignore the rabbit trails. And then second, address the steamroller problem directly. Okay, don't go down the rabbit trails, because that's what he's trying to get you to do. Address it correctly. And then if you need to let him continue until there's an opening, go ahead and wait for that. But ask something like, could I ask for a favor? I'd love to respond, but you keep interrupting. Would it be all right if I answered your first question, and then you could tell me what you think? Is that okay with you? This is kind of a polite way to do this. Notice you're narrating the conversation. You're saying, hey, you did this. I'm trying to answer. You did this. I'd like to keep answering. Would that be all right with you? So you're narrating what happens. Next, another way to go about it. Quick question. Do you actually want a response here? I'd be delighted to give you one, but every time I try, I get cut off. So if you want to just continue talking with no actual conversation, I'll sit back and listen to you. Do you want me to respond, or should I just listen? If you want a conversation, I'll need some time to respond. Would you allow me that time? Notice this is a little more aggressive than before. You're actively calling out, hey, if you wanted to just be the you show, that's okay. Let me know. I just need to know how to respond. If you're basically saying, hey, let's have a good conversation, but it's being a bit more direct because they're a bit more hostile. Or lastly, I'd like to propose a better way to have this conversation. You make your point, I'll be polite and listen. Then when you're finished, it'll be your turn to be polite and listen while I respond. Is that okay with you? Trying to narrate the conversation, trying to make the point, hey, the things you're doing is rude and it's not good for a good conversation. But said in a question, said in a narrating way. Okay? Move to this step only if they have used up a lot of grace. Okay? Try the first step first. Try to stop him first, and if that works, to in the conversation, good. If not, then this is necessary. It can also be difficult for people who are less strong-willed, more gentle-spirited. But I have to tell you, if you are too afraid to do any of these things, you won't get anywhere in this conversation with the steamroller. So you'll have to muster up some courage to say something like this. It doesn't have to be this direct, but it does have to happen if you want that conversation to actually be productive. Because what they're doing is rude. What they're doing is illicitly, berating you, and that's not fair for a good conversation. Okay, so let me encourage you, people who are less strong-willed, a bit more gentle-spirited, to get some courage, and you need to practice these words. So this should work with the person, and if they apologize, accept their gesture, and get back to the issue. Say, let's see where we left off. If I understand you correctly, you said this. Here's how I would respond, and then answer. Because you've just shamed them. They've been shamed for what they were doing, and hopefully they feel a little bad for not having a good conversation. But once again, you've bought some time with them. Don't waste it. Don't be illicit. Don't you yourself dominate. Actually have a good conversation and then say, what do you think? You're asking them to have a good conversation. That's what we're about. All right, if step two doesn't work, go immediately to step 3. When all else fails, walk away. What else can you do, right? Depending on the severity of their sentence stream, you may need to walk away in the middle of his rolling. But if he's paused before, you can make it to 1, go ahead and leave at that point. And then just give him the satisfaction of the last word. That's just fine. And if you want to say something, you say, it seems that this conversation isn't going in a productive direction. I'm going to have to let you have the last word, and then I'm going to move on. You're in control of your side of the conversation. You're a participant in the conversation. There is conversational, what's that word where you buy some equity, where you come up with somebody and say, hey, how are you? What's your name? All the things, and then they are kind of obliged to ask you those same questions. Clout? I don't remember. There's the word for that. Conversational money? I don't know. Regardless, I'm having a hard time getting my point across, so I'm just going to have to let this go for now. Thanks for your thoughts. And then leave, physically walk away from the person, because you're in control of your side of the conversation. And remember that you're always gracious, you're always in control, because sometimes if you're talking to somebody, especially somebody who's hostile, there might be people around listening, and so you may not necessarily be talking to that person and trying to win that person at the moment. You may be talking to these people. Okay, so how you handle this type of situation may be impressive, may impress on these people. Okay, and if you fly off the handle, then that's what they'll see you doing. Okay, you may be reaching those in earshot, which often happens when you talk about controversial issues. All right, review. Don't think there's a lot. Logical arguments might not change minds because they're not magical. Often there's some barriers in rejecting the message. There's all kinds of things that goes on. Try to find those out. And then with the steamroller, how to do that is to stop the interruption graciously but firmly and negotiate a conversational agreement. Shame him by making a direct request for courtesy. And that's not a hard thing, that's not a bad thing to do. It's not rude to request courtesy. And then leave, and never match a steamroller's rude tactic with rudeness, right? Give them the last word and then let it go. Okay? Awesome. Rhodes Scholar. So what Greg Koukl calls a Rhodes Scholar is what is the way to assess whether an appeal to authority is actually legitimate or not. This tactic hinges on the difference between informing and educating. So when someone uses an authority and appeals to them, it's assessing those things. We talked a little bit about appeal to authority, I think, in our logical fallacies talk. Here is what it looks like. So remember, an argument or a conclusion is the roof of a house, and the reasons, the premises, are the walls of the house. So every conclusion needs to have good reasons to support it, right? So what we're doing here, when someone cites an authority, what you're asking is for the scholar's reasons, not the scholar's credentials. So sometimes the authority has just stated an opinion, and that is what's being repeated. And so they're not always actually giving their reasons for what that statement or point is. It's more just the opinion of the author, but the author hasn't given sufficient reasons for their conclusions. Remember, this is Columbo 2, which is how'd you come to that conclusion, right? So when you interact with people who appeal to experts and scholars, you must be able to tell the difference between a claim and an actual argument. Geisler says, all appeals to authority ultimately rest on the evidence that authority has. The quote goes on to say, that letters, Norm Geisler goes on to say, the letters after the name doesn't mean a thing without the evidence to back up his position. Now, presumably, he got those letters because he studied and got some of those things, but what happens here is we don't want to accept that with blind acceptance. We're simply asking for reasons, and that's not an unreasonable thing to do. So this happens sometimes when the authority steps out of his practice, of his actual realm of authority. There's nothing wrong with citing authority in a premise to a conclusion, but you need to be able to give those reasons. You need to be able to defend that premise. It's not just, this guy said, therefore done. You need to give those reasons. So it's perfectly legitimate to cite an authority, but scholarship can be misapplied when the authority weighs in outside his area of expertise, which would move him to the unqualified authority. So always use Columbo 2. That's what this one's about. Rhodes Scholar tells you to ask for how they came to that conclusion, not just, oh, they said it? Okay, that must be true. Okay, next. This is classic Greg, talking about another old detective show. So before, Columbo is an old detective show, and that's what we talked about before. This one's from Dragnet. This is Joe Friday, the character. He often asked this of his witnesses when he was interrogating them. Just the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. So, just the facts trades on, is the thing you're saying true? And if not, what are the actual facts, right? So, here's a house that's falling because the argument conclusion doesn't have sufficient reason to hold it. So this tactic, just the facts, ma'am, has two things that are required. One, you have to be aware of the many challenges that Christianity, challenges to Christianity, are often based on bad information. And then two, you have to actually know the facts. Or you may be taken in by the objection and try to defend something that's not based on, that's based on misinformation or a lie. So you have to know the facts. Otherwise, you might be taken in by this objection. So take this objection for one. Religion is the greatest source of evil in the world. More wars have been fought and more blood has been shed in the name of God than any other cause. I have heard this objection. Have you? So what you do is you use just the facts, man. You say, ask, is it true? Is it a legitimate argument? So what we're doing is so you need to know the facts, or you need to know how to get the facts, right? So which can be used with a simple internet search engine. People call it Googling or something. So a simple Google search would reveal the Encyclopedia of Wars that says of the 1,763 wars chronicled over the last 5 millennia, only 123, which is less than 7%, are motivated by religion. So just on the face of this argument, it sounds very powerful, and it sounds like we have to talk about a theodicy, defending God, in this type of thing. But in fact, is it actually true? No, it's not. When you go and look and ask them what they mean and who said that and where is it. There's also other arguments and evidences here. And if you have the book, you can look it up in the book. It's in Just the Facts, Man, which you have, right? Yes, that's right. So this is asking for the actual evidence. Another example of Just the Facts, Ma'am, is you have to follow the plan of ask the claim, figure out what the claim is, write it down in unambiguous terms, take the things away, ask if that person means what they said. This actually helps you and the challenger avoid ad hominems, and then ask if it's true. So a student wrote down in a university publication that pro-lifers have no right to oppose abortion unless they are willing to care for the children born to mothers in crisis pregnancies. This was an article written by someone at a university. So notice the arguer makes two assertions. One is the point that abortions should be allowed because the child will not be taken care of. So this assertion we'll use take the roof off. Remember the reductio ad absurdum. So if we take that same argument and apply it elsewhere, you could argue that you have no right to stop me from stomping on my puppies unless you're willing to adopt them. So that would be the absurd conclusion of that philosophy. The immoral act of stomping puppies doesn't become okay since just because there's nobody there to adopt the puppies that you stomp on. It's still an immoral act, and that's what we're talking about. But two, the other assertion that this argument makes is the claim that pro-lifers are not doing anything for pregnant women who carry their babies to term. And here is where we use the topic that we're talking about, Just the Facts, Ma'am, where you ask, is that actually accurate? Is that factually accurate? So look into your favorite search engine, and it'll reveal an abundance of Christian-run pro-life services aimed at helping the mother carry the baby to term and afterwards. So this is just patently false. These you have to use all of these in conjunction. You have to be aware of these things. But this, Just the Facts, Ma'am, you need to at least know how to look it up. Ask yourself, is it factually accurate? If you know the facts, bring them forward. But if you don't, look it up to see if it's actually factually accurate, right? I'm going to skip that one, but I do like talking about the Council of Nicaea because it is thrown around like some sort of mic drop. The review. Often the challenge is based on misinformation or error. Ask what the claim is, lay it out in unambiguous terms. Ask if the claim is accurate, know the facts. But sometimes you don't actually, let me see. Yeah. I put an asterisk here because sometimes you don't actually necessarily have to know that it's false. You can kind of see it on its face. You don't actually have to know the facts. You can see something is fishy on its face. So here's an example. I am such a good evangelist. I have 10 4-hour conversations every day. So for that one, you don't actually have to know how many evangelistic conversations I have every day. You just need to know how to do some math. So 10 4-hour conversations every day, that is too many hours in a day if you didn't do the math to 40 and 24. You're welcome. So sometimes you don't actually have to know the facts. You can just look at the claim and be like, that's not right. And then ask them about that. You're like, how can that even be? So that is Just the Facts, Ma'am. So we have gone through 1 through 7. And now we're on our last 3. Inside Out. Now, Inside Out, we're going to take a break from actual tactics and just talk kind of about a philosophical position really quick. So, it's meant to encourage you that everyone that's common to everybody, kind of intuitive, common to everyone's humanity, things that kind of we all feel in a general sense. In Greg's book, he tells a story about that he starts a speech with, why do we all feel guilty? Maybe guilt is a cultural construction, but here's another possibility. Possibly we feel guilty because we are guilty. And he goes on from there. But he said he's never had anyone come up to him after the talk and tell him that he's wrong. No one has ever said that they've never experienced guilt. So this philosophical position kind of trades on that. Inside Out reminds us that this is God's world and everyone has to live in it. And it comes to light in different ways. So this is good old Richard Dawkins. Hi, Richard. So according to his naturalistic view, morality is just a relativistic trick of evolution to get our genes to the next generation. And he talks about there's no evil and no good, right? Then, in his work, The God Delusion, he chides God, the God of the Old Testament, with all kinds of nasty names. And I was going to name them all, and I practiced them, but I'm not confident in pronouncing all of them. Also, I don't know what some of them mean, but I get the gist. Chides God with all these nasty names, right? So, do you see the issue here first? That's kind of the big one. Think back to one of our tactics, the sibling rivalry one. Or I think this would be the infanticide relationship. If there's no evil and no good, what's he complaining about over here? Right? If evil doesn't exist, why talk about how evil God is? There's two opposing viewpoints. But the second quote, this one about how bad the God of the Old Testament is, shows his common sense moral realism. Greg puts it this way, Greg Koukl. He says, his protest makes no sense in his minimalist molecules in motion world, but it's perfectly consistent with the world that actually exists. Not that his argument is just, but that objective moral objections make sense in God's world. To object to moral outrages is consistent with the world that God made, right? So that's what Inside Out is it trades on this tactic this thought that all these things kind of come to light at one time or another. Bill Nye says that we're a speck on a speck orbiting a speck among other specks. Very clever, but also supremely depressing. Because if that's all we are, what sort of meaning is there to us? What sort of meaning do you get to a speck? Carl Sagan talks about how we emerged from microbes and muck. We find ourselves in bottomless pre-fall, lost in darkness. There's no one to send out a search party. Those guys are right in a world without God. But this type of despair, no one really believes, not deep inside. Bertrand Russell, the famous atheist, that we must build our lives on the unyielding foundation of universal despair. This is just depressing. Now, I'm not saying this isn't an argument about how, look how depressing the other side is. Come to this side, we're less depressing. Look, there's less depression here. That's not what we're saying. We're trading on the intuition that everyone has of a sense of meaning, of a sense of senses that we all kind of share intuitively. Solomon says that God has set eternity in our hearts. And this comes from the image of God. And if God made this world, then everyone is made in his image. Page 1 of the Bible talks about God creating man in his own image. This is the image of God is what makes abortion, homicide, and sexual slavery wrong. It's the reason we're not free to treat each other like animals. It's why certain unalienable rights belong equally to us humans, uniquely to us humans. Because we all live in God's world, we're all made in God's image. There are things all people know embedded deep within our hearts, profound things about our world and ourselves, even though we deny them or our worldview would disqualify them. On the first page of the letter to Romans, Paul talks about these things that have been made known to them. God has made evident to them. So these profound truths we all know on the inside, and eventually they'll reveal themselves on the outside. We just have to listen to it and follow it and look for it. So all people recognize brokenness. I like to ask people, I asked people, I think earlier this semester, what's wrong with the world? And I got some cool answers. I have yet to have someone answer nothing. Because we all kind of have a sense of brokenness. All people long for justice and hope for mercy. They kind of have a sense that justice should be meted out. And then once they dwell on that a little bit longer, they hope that there's mercy, because if justice were meted out, they would not be in the favorable scales. All people are restless apart from the relationship with God. This shows up when we talk about a deeper meaning for life. Because there's that sense of a deeper meaning for life, and the Christian worldview answers it. The Christian answer, the reality of things, answers it. So this is the world we live in, and these things are commonalities that we all experience. So that's inside out. Here is mini tactics, and I thought that was funny. These are little mini tactics that Greg has used and tested and feels that are uncomplicated and fairly easy to pull out when necessary. So we'll get into those. Here is all 5 of them that we're going to get to. All right. What a friend we have in Jesus. This trades on Jesus' universal credibility. Christianity is not super popular, but Jesus usually is. So what this tactic does is it trades on his popularity. It trades on his opinion. Because oftentimes people are trying to get Jesus on their side. Koukl tells a story about a conversation he had with Deepak Chopra, where Chopra tried to gain an advantage in the conversation by making Greg answer a question that would have made him look bad to the audience. And so Chopra asked him, "You really believe that Christ's version of the truth is the only version of the truth?" And Koukl answers with this tactic. He goes, "I think if the Gospels are right, Jesus claimed to be God. He claimed to be the only way of salvation, the only way of forgiveness." Mentioning that it's not him saying, "I think that Jesus, I'm the one who thinks that Jesus' version of the truth is the only one," pointing him as the one who's bad or something. But that it's Jesus who did that. So, then you can ask, do you think Jesus was mistaken? And see if they can argue for that point. We're going to skip this one because I'm short on time. Next one. So when you do this tactic, the what a friend we have in Jesus, ask them. You can even preempt this. Ask them, what's your opinion of Jesus? Like, what do you think of him? Because almost universally, people are in favor. Next is sticks and stones. This is the sticks and stones can break your bones, words will never hurt you. Kind of a lovely aphorism about helping us to not let name-calling hurt our feelings, so much so that it breaks our spirit. But the truth is that words have meaning and people have feelings. And we're all susceptible to the ad hominem, which is against the person, right? So if people call you names, we are susceptible to feeling bad and feeling hurt and not wanting that to happen. And so ad hominem is when someone attacks you as a person rather than addressing your argument offhand. They often use words to derail you from the point you have, hoping that you'll back down from that argument. Often it's these words of bigot, homophobe, Islamophobe, and racist. Racist is the favorite of today's society, but that is often an ad hominem, where it just is an attack on you as a person rather than addressing your arguments. So remember to use, if you can, use the do you feel like you're a tolerant person question, or is this a safe space? Am I able to have my opinions in this safe space, or is this a place where people are intolerant. Are you tolerant or intolerant? Which one would you consider yourself? And if you preemptive that, you may explain your opinion, and they may not be as harsh. But if you sense that, use that one. But that's a good tool to use for this style of thing, if you sense that's going to happen. But if they get to this point, go ahead and ask for a definition. Ask for clarification. They may succeed in kind of marginalizing you, putting you in a corner, or they'll change the subject really quickly. That's a red herring fallacy that we talked about as well. So, 2 reasons to ask them for a definition. 1, it stops their momentum from the illicit attack and puts you back in the driver's seat. 2, it forces them to actually think about what they mean. Yo. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. So, are you asking them for a definition of bigot, homophobe, all those things, or about inclusive, tolerant thing? I would ask them for a definition of the name they called you. Say, what do you mean by that? Why would you? What do you mean by bigot? And then when they respond, first they think through it, but when they answer, ask them why they think it's helpful to impugn your character instead of showing you where you went wrong in your idea. Why do you think it's good to attack my character rather than deal with the question I answered? Notice this is explaining the ad hominem, what the ad hominem is without actually using, that's an ad hominem. You don't have to say that. You explain what happened. That's what this is, right? You don't have to use the fallacy name. That's sticks and stones. Move toward the objection. Sometimes it's better to move toward the objection than away from it. Embrace the charge rather than actually trying to run from it or fight with it. It trades on the idea of agreeing with your opponent as much as possible. So this retort: everyone's an atheist. You don't believe in Zeus, Jupiter, or Thor. I just go one more god than you. And you say, so instead of trying to argue with that, you say, yeah, you're right. You do believe in one less god than me. That's what makes you an atheist and me a monotheist. Just kind of agreeing with him. Yep, I am a monotheist and you are an atheist. Indeed. So what's your point? What are you trying to say here? The church is filled with hypocrites. And you say, that's so true. In fact, it's much worse than that. There are liars, adulterers, drunkards, fornicators, and gluttons. All kinds of sinful actions take place in the church. That's why we need Jesus. And that's that's where you go. You kind of move toward the objection instead of trying to fight with the no hypocrites are in the church, which would be false. Christianity is just a crutch for weak people. So move toward the objection. You're right. People that have a broken leg also need a crutch, and we need God to help us and to hold us up and to forgive us. So moving toward the objection instead of trying to fight too much. This can be a useful tactic. Tell them that they're right, but that doesn't prove what they want it to prove. It doesn't work in their favor as they're expecting. But when you use this, it kind of takes the wind out of their sails. Watch your language. This tip is not talking about avoiding vulgarities, though you should. This one asks you to watch your churchy type jargon. Okay? So it's asking you to choose your language well. Words like faith, repentance, sin. Koukl tells it like this, that when those who don't believe in Jesus hear these words, it's similar to when you sit down in an airplane and the flight attendant starts going and you kind of just tune it out. So those words, repent, sin, all these things kind of make people tune out, that have that similar effect of tuning out, right? So watch your language means work to find synonyms for the religiously charged words in your vocabulary. Okay, so words like Bible or Word of God changes to whoever wrote it, Paul or Moses. Instead of saying Matthew 5:48 says, quote the thing and then say Jesus of Nazareth. And Koukl likes the Jesus of Nazareth because it puts feet to the person rather than saying Christ or Son of God or something. Instead of apostle, say the people who Jesus personally trained to follow after him. It's just changing your jargon a little bit making it a bit less, religiously charged here. I like faith to trust. That's a good one. Sin is a good one. Moral crimes or acts of rebellion. Moral crimes is fun. So this is a tactic that you can use to gain some ground to, have things be a little bit more understandable. Try to find down-to-earth ways of communicating your convictions to others so they don't tune out. Power of so. This tactic is when you can agree with them, but nothing useful follows from it. Okay, they don't hit any useful target when they throw out their objection. Something like, Christians are stupid. Okay, yeah, yep, some sure are. What's your point? And you can just, some non-religious people are a little mentally dense as well, right? Can Christianity be true if some Christians are dumb? Can atheism be false if some atheists are super smart? Well, yeah, of course, yeah, what's your point? Christians are hypocrites. Yeah, there's definitely some hypocrites out there, but some religious people don't measure up to their own convictions. Some are frauds. Does that mean Christianity's false? You're asking what's the point? What's going on? The power of so, okay? Or this one, you're a Christian because you were raised in America. If you were raised in Iraq, you'd be a Muslim. And Koukl goes, probably. And kind of just leaves it there. And that's, what are you saying with it? Therefore all things, where you're born doesn't have anything to do with the truthfulness of the ideologies, right? It may be an interesting observation about culture or anthropology, but it doesn't have any bearing on the truthfulness of any given ideology. Notice the challenger is completely exempt from this argument as well, right? Unless they're a Muslim, then that would be good. But if they were born in America and they're an atheist, they'd be like, okay, well, what's your excuse? How come you should be a Christian, right? Oh wait, no, you're enlightened, and you've risen above. You've figured it out. How come I haven't figured it out? That's it? Okay. So this is you're asking for clarification. You're saying, what do you mean? You're asking, so what? All right. Here's the review of the many tactics. We recognize that many people have regard for Jesus, even if they don't identify as Christians. Some people resort to name calling, and we can confront people with such attacks. Ask for a definition. Opportunities. We recognize opportunities to agree with our critics on certain points rather than fighting about every issue. We recognize the danger of using Christian terminology that most non-Christians do not understand, and then we recognize the power of so. This question helps identify objections that don't actually matter. All right, last one, more sweat, less blood. This one talks about training and how the more you train you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle, right? But this also assumes that you're getting out there in battle. Okay, this guy is training for a boxing match. You need to be training for those evangelistic encounters, right? That's what we're doing here, hopefully. So here are 8 quick tips to kind of solidify these things. Be ready. Test the waters to see if there's interest. Be watchful for an opportunity. Keep it simple. You don't have to overcomplicate things that have nothing to do with the salvation message, the gospel. Avoid religious language and spiritual pretense. Focus on the truth of Christianity, not merely the personal benefits or the societal benefits. Give reasons. I'm not going to explain that one because that's what we're here for. Ratio. Stay calm. Don't get mad. Don't look annoyed. Keep your cool. If they want to go, let them leave. If you see them looking for an exit, back off. You don't have to force a conversation. That's not what we're here for. If possible, don't let them leave empty-handed. Give them your number or a tract or something, or your business card, or even like a website to look up. Try to let them, give them something to consider. Some encouragement for you. Don't retreat just because you face opposition, because you will face opposition. But will you be ready, is the question. Being ready means keeping an eye out for those circumstances and opportunities. Measure your legitimacy by your faithfulness, not by like the number of success stories you've had, because we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. Okay, so we're measured by our fidelity to our Savior, not by the number of notches in our belt. study the tactics and be ready to use them in appropriate situations. Know the truth, which means open your Bible and be ready to give an accurate answer. Know what it says, know the confusions. That's one of the things we're here for. I like chatting with you guys because we bring up random Bible difficulties and people don't know about them. And I'm like, oh, well, let me explain them to you. I don't want you to be caught off guard there. That would be terrible. Remember tactics. The stuff I've taught these last 2 weeks that I've taught they're not substitute for knowledge. So cleverness without truth is manipulation. And lastly, be a good ambassador. Koukl says to represent Christ in a winsome and attractive way and show the world that Christianity is worth thinking about. So if you're a follower of Christ and you're in this room, it shows me that you agree with that statement there. And that's really encouraging. That's also what we're up to this semester. Represent Christ in a winsome and attractive way. Any questions? Okay. What I want to do is I want to end, I know it's 9 o'clock right now, but if you would indulge me for the last 5 minutes, is when you're done, we can be done and you can get up and talk about nothing. But what I would like you to do is get back with your group and kind of go through each one of these and remember what it is and what the argument was and how to respond, or like, well, this one was this thing and this one was this thing. Don't let one person talk each time, just kind of go through. But I want you to talk through it so that you kind of solidify these tactics, these situations that are going on here, okay? So, go ahead and do that. That'll be the end of the conversation. That'll be the end of the live stream. But this is what I want you to end with, okay? See ya.